Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Real Conversations about Aging Parents. I am so excited today to have a former podcast guest with me, Maneesha Ahluwalia. Hi, Maneesha. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. Thank you.
You came back, even though I already told you I was an Aggie and you're a Longhorn. And so you decided that this was going to work. So I appreciate that.
We can put our aside.
Okay. Okay. All right. Until, the game.
Yeah.
And I still haven't visited your parents, but it's still on my list to go meet these wonderful people. So thank you. So the reason I brought you back, as you mentioned in the previous podcast, I think you have an incredibly beautiful and helpful perspective in assisting people that feel like they're under a lot of weight or pressure or influence from the culture into which they were born. So can you please share with me like how you even got interested in the topic?
Perfect segue because I was in my struggles in my marriage and with my in-laws. So this must have been 2020-ish, 21, experiencing burnout at work in my physician career and the health issues I was having in terms of fertility. I had never known I had health issues until I went to a reproductive endocrinologist. So here we are having trouble in my marriage. I'm having new medical issues that I didn't know about, problems with my in-laws, burnout at work, and in comes the Netflix show Indian Matchmaking. And I was started watching it, and Seema Auntie, she's the matchmaker. She is meeting couples and meeting people in India and meeting people in the US and creating matches. And one of the scenes that was shown was this mother and her son. And the mother has this chest of treasures that she's going to gift to her future daughter in law, who she's never met because there's no daughter in law yet. But she's collecting outfits and jewelry and purses and shoes and creating this vision of this person who's going to basically come in and use all of these things. Basically, like, I have created the vision, I have created the box. Now you come in and just insert yourself into the life that I've already created for you. And the son that she's trying to find a match for, he's not in it at all. You can tell from his body language, you can tell from his willingness to have conversations about it. He's not in it, but he knows he has to fulfill his obligation to his mother and to the culture and get married and get moving in this part of life. And I'm sitting there looking at this whole scene play out while I'm watching this show, and I'm like, this is horrible. And how many people are silenced in terms of their own desires because they're culturally expected to fulfill the external desires of their parents. And I was like, this can't go on and this needs to be talked about. And I'm living through this right now and have this amazing set of parents who is unlike the convention in many ways, but also some conventional tendencies. And I was like, I already am looking for a different thing to do with my life in terms of, not practicing as a physician. I'm going to hire a coach because I had hired a coach to try and get my health in order to try to get pregnant. And it all sort of came together. If I'm going to change careers, it's going to be to do life coaching. If I'm going to be a life coach, it's going to be a life coach for Indians. And if I'm going to be a life coach for Indians, it's going to be to help people speak up about what they want and stop living for the expectations of others.
And for our listeners that had the privilege of listening to your previous podcast, they'll probably already be familiar with you. But just in case they haven't heard your personal story, can you give us just a little thumbnail sketch of kind of what you mentioned, that your parents have come around and what you went through, and realize that your parents were supportive and become part of your journey more than you had anticipated?
M Until a certain point in life, I think my parents and I had a very conventional relationship in which I basically thought, they don't get me, they don't understand me, they'll never understand me. It was only when I went through challenging times that included burnout as a physician, it included troubles in my marriage, it included fertility challenges, and it included a divorce eventually, and then finally a career change, leaving medicine and going towards a career in coaching. And I didn't see it coming, but they became an anchor of support for me through every part of what I went through. And the most, I think, like revealing, the thing that hit me the most was that they didn't need to know. They really just were open to hearing my side of things, my opinion on things. They didn't actually ever impose their opinions on me as if I had to follow them at this point in life. And that was a refreshing realization that I don't have the pressure from my parents to do what they want me to do anymore. I am open to share with them, and they are open to hear my own vision, my own dreams, my own desires. And they're there for me regardless. And this was just like an eye-opening moment. And I've reflected on this many times after that.
And I know this can be a challenging topic for us to discuss. And I always want to focus on the podcast of coming at it from curiosity. Obviously, you and I probably both have strong opinions about elements of sexism or unfairness of a lot of the traditions or pressures in lots of different cultures. Today, we'll focus specifically on Indian culture. But so coming at it from curiosity, can you just talk about, you mentioned this was a very positive experience with you. What is the normal standard experience that pulled you in? I know you mentioned the TV show, but what is it about the experience of an adult, a first generation adult in America, living with those maybe prior expectations or pressures? Like, what is their normal experience?
I remember in medical school, I met this girl, and every time we had a break from med school, which was in the Caribbean, she would return home to Los Angeles. So this means we must have been between the ages of 22 and 24. So that's the context. She's a 22 to 24-year-old woman in medical school, first and second year med school. She would go home during breaks. And every time she went home, there was a line of potential suitors ready for her to meet so that she could get married. Meanwhile, she's this woman who's independently living on an island, trying to improve her education, trying to get a medical education so she can become a doctor. And she goes home on a break, and the only thing that she's focused on, because her parents want her to, is meeting potential suitors and get married. So it just seems like there's an expectation of us to be highly educated, independent, but also meet the conventional path of being married at an early age, start having children, and you marry somebody of the opposite gender, and that person, if you're a female, then you become part of that other person's family and you're no longer part of your parents' family. But if you're male, then the person coming into the family who should be female will be the person to take care of their in-laws. And it's like this unwritten rule and expectation that we all kind of know.
And I just wanted to highlight that because it can sound unexpected to a lot of people that the convention that you mentioned is sort of a cultural mechanism to ensure aging persons are cared for. And when you look at cultures across the world, everybody kind of manages this a little bit differently. But it sounds like there's a strong cultural tradition for a couple to have at least one son, and it's that son's future spouse or daughter-in-law that will actually be expected to provide the care for the aging parents, up to and including like personal care, like personal hygiene, dressing, bathing, those types of things. Is that kind of how it goes?
That is exactly how it goes, and that is exactly what I witnessed in my own family because my mother took care of my grandparents, who are my father's parents. As they aged, as they needed help toileting, as they needed help transferring, as they needed help preparing food, eating, feeding them, like all of it.
And I know you had mentioned this prior, but it sounds like she's once she's left to the other family, if that's kind of how to think about it, she no longer has any other obligations to her own parents. That she's almost assumed her husband's parents in a way that we think the opposite, where your daughter, then the daughter here, usually in the States, like if I work in a nursing facility, it's the daughter that tends to show up, not the son, right?
Yeah.
The daughter
Yeah.
is involved in all the decision making, and for the most part, that's definitely not 100%. But
Yeah.
what happens to the relationship once the female leaves and becomes part of the other family? What is that relationship with her parents at like her biological parents at that time? What does that look like?
So I can tell you from my standpoint, my mom moved away from her country of origin. She moved away from India. She moved to the United States. So, in a very real way, she had very little contact with them in the beginning. Calling was expensive. My grandparents in India didn't even have a phone in their home, so they would have to receive a phone call at their neighbor's home, go talk to my mom, and they would yell in the phone because the lines were terrible, so you had to yell. There was no WhatsApp, there was no, Wi-Fi calling. It was all very expensive. So, first of all, she barely talked with them. But the relationship is that she's a daughter that we married off, and she's now belonging to another family. And she's our daughter technically, but she lives somewhere else now, and she lives as a part of a different family, and that other family is her family now, and she's gonna have children, and those are gonna be her family, and hopefully she'll come back and visit every once in a while, and maybe we'll see her, and that's about it.
Does that affect the grandparents' relationship with grandchildren? Meaning, are the paternal grandparents, are you closer to them than your maternal grandparents? Because, I mean, is that
Yeah,
like how that breaks down? Because I mean, in the States, you kind of think of it as equal, right? Like they're just grandparents. Like
yeah.
my mom's parents and my dad's parents are all grandparents to me. But it sounds like with that situation, it almost would align to where your paternal grandparents are much more present in your life. Is that kind of how
My
it ends up
paternal
being?
Yeah, I don't know how unique my situation is, but I don't think it is. My paternal grandparents moved to the United States when I was born, and I think because my father is obligated to take care of his parents, at least from, providing for them, then it would be natural for my grandparents to move in with my father when they came to the US. Just like many other of my dad's peers, their parents came to the US and lived with them. And naturally, if they live with you, the grandchildren are going to be closer to that set of grandparents. My mom's parents would never come and live in the home that I lived in because that's technically my father's home. And my mom's parents would never come and live in my mother's home because maternal grandparents don't come and live with their daughters, or parents don't go and live with their daughters. That's just not how the culture works. So, in most ways, I would say, yes, as a grandchild, you are definitely going to be closer with your paternal grandparents. And I know that there's exceptions, but yeah.
Sure. So, and I'm not, I don't mean to put you on the spot as like a historian of all things, but what time did women start pursuing education? You mentioned your friend in medical school and then yourself included, maybe 50 to 75 years ago, were women still working outside the home and then sort of balancing that with the aging parent? Or was it one of those situations where the man worked outside the home and then the woman was home with the kids and then basically became home with the aging parents, kind of transition from kids to in-laws?
My mom was born in 1951, and that means that she was educated in India and then continued. And she started working in India when she moved to the US at age 24. She continued working here. Her job was never gonna be as involved as my father's job. So my father would be out of the house more and not have the responsibilities of preparing his food to take to work and not having any responsibilities of the second shift at home. My mom would need to have a job that allowed for her to have mental bandwidth and physical energy to be able to do the second shift both morning and evening. So yes, she can work, and yes, she can make money, but also that doesn't excuse or alleviate her other roles and responsibilities.
And I ask that because in my own, thinking about this topic is if you rewind back far enough and women did not leave the home basically. I'm not saying that was a great situation, but from a pragmatic standpoint, it made sense as the children left the home, then the aging parents came back into the home because she was never expected to leave the home. But somehow, in the last 75 to 100 years, as women were actually able to acquire an education and the ability to work outside the home, which is relatively new. But the old school, the old way of doing it is, oh, but nobody changed the obligation or the cultural pressure at the same time. It's like you didn't get to trade one thing in for the other. It was both and. And I feel like one of the most interesting parts of this topic to me is that we are literally in this friction period where women are having to work and decide how this is going to go. That's why this podcast exists. Yeah, it made sense 100 years ago when I couldn't even drive or vote, or whatever. Yeah, I guess I'd stay home and I needed something to do, so I'll take care of your parents or my parents. But we haven't relooked at the formula. And obviously it's not working for a lot of people. And obviously it doesn't just affect women. It affects men too. But in our specific, we're the ones that have kind of left the home, but not left some of the obligations or expectations.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, particularly in the situations you're describing, it's even maybe more amplified. Like, it's not just like a general expectation, like it's like part of you belonging to a family.
It's part of you belonging to a family. And I just want to highlight the word that you use, which is tension. And I think there's an assumption that there is tension created based on this added expectation. I almost think that there isn't tension because it's an assumed responsibility that is seamless and flows right from a woman living with her parents, getting married, assuming responsibilities of caretaking not only of her children, but of her in laws. The idea of tension doesn't end her. If you ask my mom right now, she'd be like, yeah, that's what was expected of me. I just did what was expected. She may have internal thoughts and feelings about it. But generally, in the family, you're not going to talk about how there's tension about it. You just move through it.
So then the tension now. So how you have the life coaching side of things, what pain points are you mostly seeing and addressing in this whole topic? Maybe not specifically
Yeah.
with your parents, but what
Yeah.
brings people to you?
I'll give you a very detailed example from a client that I just spoke with 2 days ago. He just came on as a new client and he said to me, I want to start working on things outside of my career. I'm good in my career. It's going well. I've put off a lot of things because I've been building my career. So now my career is established and I want to work on other things. And I said, well, what kind of other things? He's, well, I need to look for a partner. I need to get married. And I was like, well, how's that going? Well, before I would put it off because I was working on my career. Now I'm saying I don't want to date because there's this fear of rejection and fear of vulnerability. And I said to him, I'm going to say a statement out loud to you. You tell me your first instinct and response. And I said, you want to get married very soon. And his response was, first of all, he leaned back and he said, I don't know about that. And I said, okay, how does that feel? And I don't know, it feels kind of wrong. I don't know if I should be thinking, like, it feels kind of like I feel kind of guilty. I was like, but how do you actually feel knowing that that's not what you want right now? And he's, I feel a deep sense of relief because I've felt this pressure from, and I said, well, who's the pressure from? And I expected him to say his parents. But what he said was Indian culture. Indian culture pressures him from the outside to the point where he's now created self pressure, internal pressure to make himself go out and date. And he doesn't want to. He doesn't want to get married right now. He's in his early 30s. He's not ready. He doesn't want it. He wants his life that he's been building. And just in a very real sense, we don't stop to question what it is that we actually want because we just keep going with convention. But now the tension is here.
Right.
The tension is here because we can think for ourselves and we can have more frank conversations with our parents that our parents would never dare to have had with their parents. My dad reminds me of this all the time. Maneesha, the way you talk with me, I would have never dared talk to my father the way you talk to me. And it's not a disrespect thing. It's me voicing my thoughts, wishes, desires. He wouldn't do that. He would just say, okay, Papa, whatever you want, I will do.
And I'm sure I'm wondering if you've seen that movie. Was it All Things Everywhere All at Once, or I'm gonna mess
I
up.
haven't.
Oh my goodness. So
Yeah.
very close to it won all these awards, and I finally watched it a couple weeks ago, and it starts with an aging parent. So it's that the people featured in the show are Chinese. And there's this aging parent in a wheelchair, and they're very similar to what you just said, like whatever he says. And of course he wants their business to be successful. And then there was a granddaughter that had a girlfriend, and they didn't want to tell the aging parent that the girl, there's an interesting dynamic in that movie. But and so people are coming to you because they're in conflict with their cultural pressure and then their own personal, voice and finding what they actually want. So how do you help them get from point A to point B? And then let me start there. I have so many questions. Let me start there.
We start talking about what comes up as they start to listen to their own desires and start to voice them out loud, for example, to their parents or to themselves. And there's a sense of guilt that a lot of immigrant children face. And they're ridden with this guilt, trying to bring up to themselves and to their parents, this is what I want. But they're also living on a day to day with this feeling that something isn't right. Like, I've done the career, I've achieved that, and something doesn't feel right. I'm not living the life that feels right to me. And I call that feeling misalignment. So it's the push and pull between guilt of doing what you want and living with the misalignment. And the way we move through it is we highlight that one of these two emotions, misalignment or guilt, is just no longer tolerable. And the point at which they come to me is when that misalignment is no longer tolerable and they're ready to deal with the guilt.
How do you what I've seen, and I don't, not specific to Indian culture, I'm sure this is present in a lot of different situations, but the people and the generation ahead of you are like, yeah, I've been living in misalignment my entire life. I didn't want to do many of the things I did. For instance, if it's I took care of my mother, I took care of my mother-in-law. Like I already did the really hard things. And then the adult child is, yeah, but I don't want to do those things. Right. And so I say that from the conflict I can see setting up very quickly of that, I walked however many miles in the snow to go to school, and now you don't want to ride the bus. And like, how do you help people diffuse or move through that kind of latent, easy to ring the bell of, look, I didn't have a comfortable life, nor should you. That's the expectation. How do you even begin to have that conversation? Is that conversation with yourself in your own head? Is that conversation with the point of conflict, like the parent, or how does that work?
Adult children who've already been through the things they were supposed to do and now are living on the other side of it. The the first part of the conversation is usually around resentment, and the second part of it turns to how are we gonna move through the next part of life knowing that resentment is gonna come up, but knowing that there's a different way to think and feel about it. And the only way to know what else you can think and feel about something is to be able to come into a safe space and voice other thoughts that you don't allow yourself to voice. And that's the coaching experience. You say things out loud and sometimes hear them for the first time. And like this guy who has his career established and was going through the dating process, he doesn't want to date, but he never said that out loud. And he just kept it inside. So most of the things that we feel and think, we just don't say them out loud because we're culturally suppressed. And
And
I
so
think the coaching experience allows for us to voice things that we've never voiced before. And only then can we start to hear and think in a new way. We just weren't allowed to before. We didn't know that we even thought those things.
if I am able to achieve clarity with coaching and reflection on what I really want. So say if I'm that person and I really want to wait a couple years to get married, or maybe I don't want to date women, or maybe I don't want to partner at all, whatever it is that they achieve clarity on, how do they balance? I've now achieved like this new version of myself, or I'm going towards this new, clearer version of myself and leaning into what I really want. And if those things, whatever they are, of that new version of yourself are in so much conflict with your culture or your tradition, that this also means that you are leaving the family. Like you are being ostracized, you are being isolated, put outside, you know, your family of origin. How do people navigate that journey? What is a successful way to go through that?
And I think what you're asking is really, really important. And it is the crux of what happens in these conversations and coaching sessions. It sounds like I now know what I want. I also know what my parents want. I now know what I want. I also know what the culture wants of me and expects of me. I also know that moving forward with what I want is going to bring up intense emotions on both sides, whether it's my parents or me. They're going to have all their feelings. I'm going to have huge feelings of fear and of guilt. Those are the two main that I'm going to face as an adult child going forward with what I want now. And it comes back to what I said before. The experience of a misalignment that they're in at the moment, it's just more than they can tolerate. And it allows you to see that that intolerance to misalignment is going to have to be left behind. We're going to have to leave that misalignment behind, but that also means going towards the fear and the guilt and allowing for that to be okay. It's going to be okay if your parents are angry. It's going to be okay if guilt comes up. At least what you're doing is moving in a direction towards what you want and out of misalignment. And that is the formula. That is the awareness. That is the novelty that's offered in coaching so that you can be empowered knowing that I am about to face some guilt. I am about to face some fear. I am about to face my parents' resentment. But that I can now do because the force behind me is getting away from this misalignment that I'm living in day to day. And I have the support of a coach, and I have the support of somebody who's been through this, and I have the support of somebody who's going to show me that my clarity was that misalignment is no longer tolerable. And I'm going to keep coming back to that.
And maybe the bridge there, what like this kind of beautiful door that would open would be you're already uncomfortable. Like you're already, like you said,
Are already
fine.
uncomfortable.
Why don't we just switch that out and you live in your true self? And yeah, they're gonna be upset and angry and not invite you to, Thanksgiving or whatever. But but then the discomfort is still present. You were already living the discomfort, but not as yourself, right? And it makes me think I was talking to somebody about this the other day. I always like for the way that the brain engages with this information to neutralize the language and say, "Oh, well, your parents want you to wear a yellow shirt, but you've decided that, man, you feel great. You feel like 100% in a purple shirt, right? And so we're going to talk about like living in your purple shirt and they only like people in yellow shirts. But on the other side of that is finding other people who like purple shirts too, because it's hard for the brain, I think, to anticipate that what opportunities now come too. Because once you're like living in alignment, all of these other universes open up that didn't seem available to you or even perceived by you. And I'm not sure you ever live with, oh, my parents really wish I wore a yellow shirt, so they never talk to me again. I guess that's what it is. That's the cost of the purple shirt, right? But the cost of you not wearing the purple shirt is everything.
Yes.
That's the only thing. That's the only life you have. And so I just think, man, it would be so hard. And thank God I don't live in that situation. But I look kind of from the outside at people that are going through that, and I'm thinking it's an incredible amount of courage to live in the purple shirt. And if you're a coach that helps people find the closet first and then try it on, and then they're like, okay, is it okay if I try this on? And then you know how it is when you wear clothes that you feel great in, you can't, it's unmistakable, right? And when you wear clothes that don't fit, it's unmistakable. Then nobody is going to gaslight you and be like, no, that's not too tight. No, that's not, you know? And so that is, maybe it's finding that unmistakable feeling of when does it feel unmistakable that this is alignment. That is incredible that like you're creating that forum for people.
I'm definitely inspired by each conversation that I have because I find the people in front of me are the people who are having to do that brave, courageous thing. And it's my job to let them see that they have the power to do it, that they have the courage to do it, that they have the bravery inside of them. And we highlight other moments in their lives where they've already used that power. And so that's the other job is like the reminding, hey, you already have this inside of you. You already have the measurements of the perfect purple shirt inside of you. You just got to go put it on.
Yeah. One of my best, like, freeing thoughts, because 'cause I've talked to so many people, not specifically in this cultural pressure, but just in how do they disappoint an aging parent? Like,
Mhm.
"I'm not gonna move there," or,
Mhm.
"I can't be there when this is gonna happen," especially because 'cause they're in conflict with their own career, their own kids or whatever,
Mhm.
and I love the thought, trust them to love you the best that they can with that information.
Yes.
And maybe it looks like throwing a fit. Maybe it looks like not calling you for 3 months. Maybe it looks like them calling their neighbor and your aunt calling you and telling you that you should do this, and that's the best they can do.
Yeah.
Because I feel like any other thought is intolerable to me. Like the thought of they could do better, they should do better, I expect more. To me, that tortures me. And it's like a principle of if I just by default think they're doing the best they can do, it doesn't mean I have to like how they're reacting to it. Doesn't mean I even agree or that I would react that way, but it's just so much easier for my brain to think that they're doing the best that they can do. But then what that allows me to do is move on to the next stage of thinking, which is, all right, they're doing the best that they can do. Now it's up to me. Like I've already made this boundary clear. I've already done this. Like I've got to live my life now too. And me continuing in this tension or friction with that they're unhappy or that they're having a fit, it's like that is me participating in it. And I'm not, doing what I wanna do. That's a misalignment to me as well, because I know I've done the best I can do, and if the best I can do is tell you I'm not gonna get married or I'm not gonna, move in with you or I'm not gonna do this, that's the best I can do. And just kinda having that default mode because when we get into sort of controlling how they react to that information, I think there's a lot of issues with aging parents there. Let me tell them this boundary, and I expect them to just be fine with it. Can you talk a little bit about your experience of how you coach people and their own expectations of if you're gonna make
Yeah.
this decision, like, there might not be a big party on the other side of it, like, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, there's a lot of talk in the session about the realities based on our experience. So what I'm trying to say is like when we talk to our parents or when we talk to the people that are in our loving families, we know already how they're going to react. We already know what their facial expressions are going to look like. We already know their tone of voice. We already know their words that they're going to use. We already know their go-to phrases that they tend to use. So let's not kid ourselves when we get to these challenging conversations and voice our truths that they're all of a sudden going to become a new person that just becomes accepting. So we really do create and role play almost what actually is going to play out and not what we expect and want to play out. What actually is going to happen is they're hearing something for the first time. They've never understood that these are your thoughts. They're first processing this in front of you. How they process it is how they process it. It may be verbally, it may be emotional manipulation, it may be lots of different things that we consider toxic. And we have to allow them that time to process it however they process it. We are giving them information for the very first time. And we don't know what their first thoughts are, but we can definitely assume what their first reactions are.
That reminds me, I did a podcast with Krista St. Germain on grief, and she described grief as just the distance between your expectation of how something was going to go and then how it really went.
Mhm.
And it's I would imagine as you're going through this, like, you have your first grief, which is, "I thought my life would go this way," and it's going this way, or I thought I might be able to achieve this, but I feel pressured into doing this. And so you've already kind of processed your initial grief. And then no matter what, if you give information to somebody,
Yeah.
regardless of how you feel about whether it's, sexist or
Yeah.
terrible or backwards or whatever, they still get their grief because you're still giving them information that is a way that they thought their life was going to go. Maybe they thought they were going to get a daughter-in-law to take care of them. Maybe they're scared. Maybe they
Mhm.
thought they were going to get grandkids to distract them from their terrible marriage or from their
Mhm.
own depression. Like maybe you don't even know all the stuff in that closet in that brain that you getting married or you making this like geographic decision was
Mhm.
hinging on because they're not, we don't go around telling everybody everything in our brain either. And so their grief reaction could be either outsized to what you expect or bizarre or different or manipulative out of their own need to control the situation or minimize that gap between how they thought something would go and how it went.
Yeah.
So I can
And
imagine.
how they thought something was gonna go is based on their own culture and what they grew up in. Well,
Right.
this is what happened in our families, why isn't it happening for us? Now they feel gypped.
Right. Can we talk more about that? Because I think that's a big part of this that may be hard to understand. And I don't want to speak for sure for first generation immigrants, but the idea of so much has been put in and sacrificed to create these options and this opportunity for you to think freely and be free and be whatever you want and do whatever you want. And we're in a culture that largely accepts differences like LGBTQ and so forth. Like, then we've created this situation, but that hasn't changed their own experience up to that point. And I would think, take a lot, like for, like you mentioned with your parents, to pivot and say, I'm so glad you have all these opportunities, but all of the formulas that have been in play for my entire life are now upended. Now I don't know that I'm going to get taken care of when I need help. I didn't save money to go to a long-term care facility. I didn't anticipate that all these things may be different, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not even sure where the question is in that other than that's a lot on both sides, like, to me.
I think that's it. I think that's the only answer is that as human beings who are evolving and becoming, more aware, we need to extend that awareness to their experience in this conversation, and that is they saw and lived through a certain life experience. They saw their parents being taken care of by them as children, and now as aging adults, they do have, in their own right, valid expectations of being taken care of by children who they raise to be independent and live wherever they want. And they still want them to move their lives back to where their home is, back to where their aging parents are, and come and take care of them. And the fact that that may not happen, and the fact that they're having a negative reaction about it is actually kind of expected. It would be out of the norm and very, very woke for someone to be like, "Oh, they're not coming home? Oh, well, they're so independent and so they're just set in their ways and they've got their own lives because we gave them all of this power and we're so proud of them and we're good." That would be such a weird reaction in my opinion. I think the normal reaction is we're so disappointed, we're so dismayed, we're so just we can't understand where we went wrong.
And so I wonder, my husband and I talk about this sometimes of we'll ask ourselves, like, what from your inherited legacy, from your own upbringing, and it could be your culture, your religion, your family specifically, what do you not want to be the legacy for our kids? So, one of the most healthiest and productive thoughts that my husband and I can come up with when we do things that feel like we're defying some tradition or expectation is let me take the blowback now. Let me take the, comments or the side eye or the friction now so our kids never have to. Like we are
Okay.
the pivot. We are the transition generation. Because if I stop this now and I don't model the behavior and I don't do this, then my kids will never know about it. Meaning if I don't, suppress all of my own wants and desires in life to go fulfill some prior religious or cultural obligation, then how could they possibly acquire that information or acquire that expectation themselves? But by doing it, I am just propagating it. And if I feel really bad right now, if I participate in the propagation of this, then I'm just shifting that. And so somebody else is going to have to be the one that says, this is how this doesn't work in this specific lineage. You can't change the entire culture, right? You're not big enough to be like, all right, nobody's going to believe this. But I mean, from the little world I can control, I have 3 children. Like we have a carefully crafted world of here's how we do things. And part of that is us faking it. Like my husband and I being like, sure, we always do it like this because that's all I want you to know, right? And so I wonder if there isn't some hero journey in there at some point of getting through the grief and the blowback and the difficulty, knowing that from whatever perspective, whether you decide to have children or not, you've become the N of one that's like, all right, I withstood it and nobody died, I guess, I hope. And you just kind of find a way to move on, right? I mean, what else are you gonna do, right? If you have somebody working with you that felt traumatized in some way by the suppressive cultural or traditional expectations from their upbringing, what success stories have you seen or what thought patterns have you seen that they think with regard to their own children? How do they change it? How do they not continue participating in a way that their own children would sort of inherit these expectations?
And I think that what's interesting is as children of immigrants in this generation, we're not far removed enough from the Indian culture. In other words, our parents were born in India, we were born here. So we are still living in 2 cultures. And so what we teach our children and what my clients teach their children is kind of a combo culture. And they teach them both. They don't teach them from just one part or just what their parents showed them. They actually bring part of that with them and they shield part of that from them. They may bring part of their American culture to their children. They may shield part of the American culture to their children. So it's kind of like this in between straddling both, not only for our parents, but also for us teaching our children. Because I think there's a big part of us that loves being Indian, that loves the Indian culture, that loves the culture that our parents come from, parts of it. And we don't want to lose that, even though we never lived there. And so there's this big push to maintain and teach parts of it, but only the parts that serve us.
So curating it, right?
Curated,
Here's what
yes,
I'm gonna keep. Here's what maybe we should not keep moving forward.
absolutely. And what's really interesting is that I've seen this a lot. And, what our parents, my parents' generation considers normal is what we now tag as toxic or manipulative. And an example of that is I'm on a WhatsApp group with my entire extended family. I might share, "Oh, I just wanted to share this good news, celebrate with me that when I was married, we just bought a property for investment and now it's being rented out. This is property number 3 in our property investment business." And my dad will come back and say on a side chat, "Maneesha, you should be careful what you share with the family. It might make somebody feel badly." And to me, that's hindering my experience of the life I'm living. For him, he's advising me based on the culture that he knows. You don't boast, you don't brag. And it's not a perfect example of like toxicity. I guess what I'm trying to say is like, there's so many things that they do that they think is just fine, but we find it offensive or we are very sensitive to it. And there's parts of this that we don't want to carry forward. Like, I want, if I had children, for them to celebrate things like that. It's good to celebrate accomplishments, even when it means another person might not have as much and feel badly about it. That's not why you're celebrating it. You're celebrating it because you find it successful and find joy in it. And it's not because you're trying to boast, it's because you're proud. And the other person, my parents would only look at it from the perspective of it's going to make somebody else feel badly, you know?
So they're like editing, right?
Yeah.
Like, I always feel like there's a lot of parents that their whole lot, like, in life is just to edit. "No, no, no, don't do that, do this. Do more of this, do less of that. Delete
Yes.
this, don't tell anybody about this, but tell everybody about this," and it's, wow, I
Yeah.
have a narrator, you know,
Yeah.
like, going on.
But, like, some of this stuff that we hear or that I hear in client sessions is, "Oh, when I brought this person to my parents' attention that they don't approve of, then they start acting like their heart troubles are kicking up or that they're going into depression, and it's because I keep talking about this boyfriend that they don't approve of." And, like, this emotional manipulation and blackmail, it's totally normal for them. It's not toxic.
That's a
They don't
lever, right? It's a lever to
what?
pull. It's like a
Yeah,
lever to pull.
it's a lever to pull, but also there's nothing wrong with it in their minds. Like, it would be a strategy given to them by their peers,
Right.
maybe.
And it's
But
not considered embarrassing to have a medical condition suddenly when there's
yeah,
only
I mean, that's a good that's really interesting that you bring that up, right? Because depression but obviously all of these conversations are taking place within the confines of a home or a phone call. This is not out in the open, you know? So
right.
that's also very hush hush. But anyway, like that kind of emotional blackmail, we as my generation, we would never do that to our children, or we would try not to, and it might happen subconsciously, but the thing is, it's not for us, it's toxic. For my parents, it and maybe not my parents, but other people's parents, it might just be normal, and we have to navigate that.
Yeah, and I like that, and maybe I need to think on this because 'cause we're expecting them to meet us somewhere, right? Here's what I'm doing differently, and I'm sure every generation is different in some way, right? And it's, I'm expecting you to be uncomfortable and meet me in this new version of myself or communicate this way. But there is going to be a limit, even with my own kids, of me saying something that sounds offensive or controlling or whatever that doesn't sound like that to me now. But will hope that they will have some grace for me. In fact, we were asking them the other day, there was like, what is it that we teach you or believe that you're going to laugh at us for when we're like, in our 80s? And they had some fun suggestion. I think of that too of, I guess you can also get a little carried away and like, this is how people need to talk to me and address me and communicate with me. And at some point, if that's a connection that you want, then there's going to be some give and take
Yes.
of, look, this is the best that they can do. And that's why I like trusting that they're doing the best. You give them feedback, hopefully in a respectful way, and then maybe they can modify. And at some point, you'll just have to decide, is it so inflammatory or toxic that you have to limit it or move away from it? I mean, that's just, I mean, you do that in all parts of your life, right? Your career and everything. So I want to I guess I want to be careful not to, I don't want to promote people being like, this is the perfect way to talk to me and the perfect way to react. And if they don't do that, they must not love me.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering, in your mind, what do you help them make it mean? Is that, you know what I'm saying? You could make it
Yes.
mean, wow, they love me so much, they really wanted this life for me. I could tell you 5 different stories, right? That would all sound convincing that they love
Yeah.
me so much, they got so angry because they're so worried for me. Or they're so angry because they hate me. They never
Yeah.
wanted me to be born to begin with or something. Like, I think there'd be
Yeah,
stories available.
oftentimes, when we get into this conversation in a coaching session, the example of having your best friend tell you their conversation with their parent. What would you say to your best friend? Because you're trying to make them feel better. And they might say things like, they're really just acting from what they know. They
Mm,
really do love you, they just have a different way of showing it. So they might be able to see it when it's not their own personal scenario, and what they say in that coaching session about their best friend is really telling of what they could truly believe about their own scenario. It's just very difficult when you're in it to see what your other thoughts could be. But when you describe what you would say to your best friend, if you just reveal to yourself, these are beliefs that I can hold too about my own situation. And so then the work is, well, if you can say it to somebody else and you can think it in your own brain, what about bringing it into your actual real life scenario when you're in conversation with your parents? Could you try to think and believe that in real time when it comes to your own personal life? Would that help you shift your perspective? Would that help you have a better experience of your relationship with your parents in that moment? So bringing it away from their personal experience, describing it as an external experience, extracting what they say, and then moving it back to their own life is the strategy that comes in handy a lot of times.
Wow, that's awesome, and that's very I think you can use that in so many different
So
scenarios.
many ways.
Be very
So many.
helpful.
Yes.
Wow. I feel like I could ask you 1,000 more questions. Let me ask you an off-topic question. I think when you reached out, I was on your social media channel. I don't remember which one. Did I see a picture of you and Zarna Garg?
Yes.
Did you meet Zarna Garg for real?
I met Zarna Garg.
You did? How
Yeah.
did that Okay, hold on, let me step back, if you don't know who Zarna Garg is. So, back in the fall of 2023, my friend gifted my husband and I some stand-up tickets. I love stand-up comedy. I love it. I have been a fan of stand-up comedy for my whole adulthood, and I had no idea who she was. And she was coming to San Antonio, and I was like, "All right, let's go. My friend can't go." And we went, and it was hysterical. I leaned over to my husband, I was like, "She's gonna be a phenomenal star."
Wow.
And this is before her 2 specials come out on either Amazon Prime or Netflix or something. Nobody's talking like her. And she had so many generational stories, many
Yeah.
that we've talked about here about her own mother-in-law. In fact, one of her
Yes.
skits is about her mother-in-law, right?
Yeah.
That's one of her main topics. So every stand-up I've seen her do, she talks about her mother-in-law. So it complements very nicely with what we've been talking about here. And I remember thinking, I love how bold this is. And I just love her story of how she's had all these thoughts in her head and finally started talking and then ended up getting on stage, and so now every time she's been even exponentially more successful every month, you just watch her
Yes.
Instagram following, and now she's opening, I think, for Tina Fey and Amy Poehler,
Right.
and she just had her recent Netflix, maybe the last month or so that came out. So, okay, I am a huge Zarna Garg fan, and so
Yeah.
then when I saw this in your feed, I was like, I have to ask you how you met.
Yes. I went to a comedy show in Boston. So love stand-up comedy.
Okay,
And I try to go to as many shows as I can. And when I saw her kind of popping up on my feeds, one of the first posts I saw about from her was about chai. And it had me on the floor. Like I was in
yeah.
tears watching this reel. So I've watched it so many times. Anyway, when she was coming, I was like, I have to go see her. So we went to go see her in Baltimore. And my boyfriend is just crafty this way, but he got us to meet her in the green room. We had a conversation, me, her, my boyfriend. It was just her. And she was talking about her family podcast. In fact, instead of talking about her comedy, I brought up to her that I was listening to her family, Zarnagug family podcast. And I think it was an off topic conversation from her. I think most people want to talk to her about her comedy. I was like, I love your podcast. I think it's so novel. It's very aligned with what I'm doing in my coaching business. We talked about my coaching business. She was like, "Oh, come on the podcast." Anyway, it was an amazing It was an amazing conversation. And now, actually, it's interesting you bring this up. She's doing her 100th episode recording live in New York City Labor Day weekend, and I happened to be going to New York City for Labor Day weekend, and we got tickets. So we will be sitting third row or second row, maybe, of this live taping, and then the show after. And the family will be there, her family, and I'll be watching it. And I'm so excited.
So I have a confession. I have a secret list of guests that would completely blow me away to come on my podcast, and she's on that list.
Okay.
So if you get to talk to her,
Yeah.
I need you to tell her you were just on this podcast, and
Yes.
she has to come be on the podcast because I am also dying to get her perspective on aging parents. So
Oh my gosh. Yes.
yeah. And it's obvious if you watch any of her stuff that she has strong opinions about aging parents. So, wow. Okay. So, thank you for sharing that. That is so cool. So,
Well,
I love when I go to DC to visit my friends, I'm going to send you a message. Maybe you can hang out with us. DC has a lot of great live comedy
yes.
venues. So, anyway, this has been really fun, Manisha. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to me today. I really appreciate it. If somebody wanted to get a hold of you, wanted to work with you, or wanted to refer somebody to you with a strong recommendation, how would they find you and how would they work with you?
Yeah, it's Maneesha Ahluwalia, but Instagram is the easiest. It's Life Coaching for Indians on Instagram. On Facebook, same thing, Life Coaching for Indians. And I have a website, Life Coaching with Dr. Maneesha Ahluwalia. That's it. I mean, just send me a message and send me a direct message on any of those platforms. I'll be happy to respond, and let's do it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I foresee us sharing maybe a margarita at a stand-up comedy soon.
Yes, that sounds amazing, but we'll leave the conversation of Longhorns and Aggies out of it.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. All right. Thank you, Maneesha. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much.
Hey everyone, it's Rebecca. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'd like to take just a moment to review the disclaimer. This podcast is for informational and occasional entertainment purposes only. Nothing discussed here is formal medical, legal, or financial advice. By listening to the podcast, we are not creating a patient-doctor relationship between you and myself or any of the guests. Really, it's just me and a possible guest or two, sometimes three, sitting around talking about difficult topics related to aging parents. If you have or suspect that you might have a medical problem or condition, you should seek advice from a licensed medical professional. If you have any questions or concerns, please read the full disclaimer in the show notes or contact me directly. Thank you again for joining us today. I can't wait to see you next week. Have a good day.